Thank you. I'm not sure I recognise that bloke. Good evening. I'd like to start out by thanking Newsworks New Zealand for inviting me to your amazing country. Today, I'm here to talk about the future of newspapers. I love talking about the future of anything, because even if you think I'm wrong, it'll take a couple of years for anyone to be able to prove it. Let me start by saying, I think that the road ahead is a bumpy one. Newspapers are going through the fastest and biggest evolution of their long history. There will be winners, and sadly, there will be losers. But I think today is primarily about looking at the positives, seeking out the opportunities, and secondly, challenging the cynics and exposing the flaws in some of their lazy thinking. I was talking to a depressed and rather stressed out UK newspaper executive about today's presentation, and he rolled his eyes and said, "Well, that will be a short presentation then, because we're all doomed." Or words to that effect. I plan to spend the next 20 minutes or so explaining why I believe he is 100% wrong. According to the wise experts, newspapers have been dying for over 80 years. In the 1930s, it was radio that was going to kill newspapers. In the 1940s, it was cinema. Think about the Pathé newsreels. In the 50s and 60s, it was television that was going to kill newspapers. And recently, it's been the internet. Indeed, if you type into Google, newspapers are, the first 10 autofills that come up are the ones that you can see there. That's 7 negatives, 2 positives, and 1 that I've got no idea what newspapers are underlined means. I think those ratios are pretty accurate, and I think they reflect the received wisdom about the future of newspapers. Everyone wants to talk about the death of newspapers and the brilliance of digital. It's the cool and fashionable thing to do. But as my wife will tell you, I've never been cool or fashionable. Also, as I'm a guest of Newsworks New Zealand, I think it would be somewhat inappropriate for me to talk about that. But just as the so-called experts were wrong in the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s, so I believe they are wrong today. Interestingly, so do General Motors, who pulled off their pay-for element on Facebook only a couple of months ago, complaining that it just didn't deliver value. However, in order to talk about the future, we have to understand where we are today. The industry, in my view, is paying the price for the lack of innovation between 1950 and 1995. That's quite a long period with no innovation. During this era, newspapers did little to adapt to the changing environment, and for the last few years, we have been paying the price. But I believe that we are about to turn the corner. Before we do that, let's just look at where we are today, and there are some pretty unpalatable truths in this. Most of this data is global or North American based, but from this data, things can only get better. There's been a huge decrease in the volume of display advertising, and I don't think anyone would argue about that. There's been an even bigger decrease in the volume of classified advertising, once described as rivers of gold by Rupert Murdoch, who then said that thanks to sites like Craigslist, sometimes these rivers dry up. There are cutbacks all over the place, and I think this is best illustrated by the 20% decrease in the number of journalists in North America. And I'm going to come back to that fact a little bit later. There is an accelerating and increasing number of closures, and sadly more to come. And one of the problems with newspapers at the moment is when they try and sell, they can't find any buyers. The one exception to this is Warren Buffett. He's not a man I would ever tend to bet against. And he said recently, "I believe that newspapers that intensively cover their communities will have a great future." And the great man has put his money where his mouth is. He's just invested $200 million in the Omaha World Herald. He's invested $142 million for the Media General chain of 63 newspapers. He's also paid $2 million to buy Lee Enterprises. And he also has a stake in the Buffalo News and the Washington Post Company. He also believes that trust is a big part of it, and trust in the internet has declined from 55% in 2000 to 40%, according to the Annenberg Center for the Digital Futures in 2011. This same report said that 63% of internet users would miss the print edition of their newspaper, and this figure was up from 56% in 2007. There's definitely a trend here that Warren Buffett seems to have spotted. However, there's some more bad news to come. The aggregators of news sites don't have the overheads, so are well positioned in the free news era. And just before we got up here today, there was a debate about how long is this free news era going to last and what's going to happen about sites like the BBC. And our sites are going to continue to give away their news for free. If people do, Google and Yahoo aren't employing journalists to discover news. Younger demographics don't have the newspaper habit, although we are seeing that start to change through free newspapers growing in the UK. Newspaper advertising sales in North America have declined for 22 consecutive quarters, and global paid circulation has decreased every year since 1986, although interestingly not in China and India, thanks to their huge growing middle classes. And in North America, circulation as a percentage of the population has decreased every year since the 1950s. All of this is painting a pretty bleak picture about where we are today. According to the recent Project for the Excellence in Journalism, papers are losing $7 in print advertising for every $1 in new digital revenue. Clearly, this is an unsustainable business model. I can't make many absolute guarantees about the future, but this is one that I will make. What won't work is racing to the bottom. If circulation and readership is declining, however slowly, leading to lower advertising revenues, and newspapers are using that to justify cutting editorial staff, that's only going to lead to a poor editorial product, which in turn is going to lead to lower circulations, which will lead to lower advertising rates, etc., etc. I don't know what the opposite of a virtuous circle is. I don't know, a vortex of hell. But that's the position which I think lots of newspapers are backing themselves into at the moment. This worrying tendency, the knee-jerk response to save money by cutting journalists, really, really worries me. Because ultimately, I believe that one of the keys to newspapers flourishing is delivering more, not less, quality journalism. More importantly, so do two people far more qualified than me to talk about it. Earl J. Wilkinson, he's got to be an American with a name like that, CEO of International News Media Marketing Association, said, differentiating journalism that infuses democracy will survive the dislodging of old ways. And Richard Gingras, Google's head of news products, said in May 2012, I do believe that journalism can and will be better than in the past. In fact, it has to be. And I think he is absolutely right about that. So I believe that leaves us with two potential outcomes. Papers gradually diminish and die. This is not a view that I share. Or secondly, papers will find new revenue streams. We will see the continued growth of online paywalls, with some papers offering full paywalls, like the Times in the UK, while others will opt for the FT or the New York Times metered style of leaky paywalls. I'm assuming that everyone knows what leaky paywalls are. Just in case anyone doesn't, leaky paywalls are paywalls which allow you to get a certain number of free articles a month, which you're encouraged to share, or if you pay, you can get access to all the articles, and again, you're encouraged to share them, and if you share them with other people get it for free. But I do believe that most newspapers will soon stop giving away all of their editorial, news and opinion for free. Although I do acknowledge that it has been a huge success for The Guardian and the Daily Mail, who have grown huge audiences that they then sell on to advertisers. However, that's some of the bad news. I do think there's much for newspapers to be positive about. More people are reading newspapers than ever before. It's just that it is across more platforms. The newspaper industry has always been cyclical, and this is just part of the downward part of the cycle. More content than ever before is being produced. We've seen the success of free newspapers growing readership in North America and Europe. Globally, and this was a fact I didn't know until I started writing this, more people read newspapers than use the internet. And I think this is one of the most important changes that's happening. There has been a huge cultural shift within the newspaper industry. The resistance to change, whether they be in the newsrooms, boardrooms, editorial, unions, or purely motivated by self-interest, all these people who have been resisting change are gradually being weeded out. So what do I think will be the 6 big differences going forwards? The first is that I think that there will be greater collaboration on innovation, incubation and experimentation. What do I mean by this? I think it makes sense for newspapers, TV and radio companies to pool things together where they can, particularly expensive things like overseas news bureaus. You know, think about how the BBC do things and the Sky Empire and Times newspaper. They're collaborating and sharing content already. As the world becomes more global, I think we'll see more and more syndicated material appearing around the world. TV companies are going to start supplying video clips to digital newspapers and vice versa. I hope and I think that competing titles need to join forces, invest in innovation and share learnings, and aim to grow the overall pie rather than worrying just about their share of an infinitely smaller pie. And I think journalists are going to be empowered to contribute and aggregate across all platforms. The second development is that quality journalism will become more valuable. Sadly, the internet means that everyone now thinks they're a journalist. This has led to an era dominated by quantity to the detriment of quality. And as the quantity of info continues to expand exponentially, the ability to assimilate this, make sense of it and repackage it will become increasingly valued. Quality journalism is already being more highly valued as consumers are increasingly aware that the news in social media often lacks objectivity. For serious news, they go to news brands that they can trust, and newspapers are some of the most trusted brands in the world. They must ensure that they never, ever lose this trust. It is arguably their most valuable asset. Finally, quality journalism will reinforce print media as the leader of the fourth estate. This role will become bigger and more important as companies get bigger, governments commission increasingly big and complex technology and infrastructure projects, and even in sport is more and more dominated by money. Think of the Soccer World Cup bids, which ended up in the World Cup going to Qatar. Policing these organisations has never been more important. Just recently, you can think about the case that was made for the weapons of mass destruction and the death of the UK scientist David Kelly, the UK MP's expenses scandal, the Wikipedia leaks, and the behaviour of US soldiers in Iraq. The third reason for my optimism is the increase in mobile penetration. More people will get their news from social media. This in turn will lead them to online newspaper content, which in turn will lead to increased readership. As more people use their mobiles to connect to the internet, and 86% of people in North America have a mobile phone, but only 33% use it at the moment to connect to the internet, this in itself will lead to more news consumption. It will also create SO-LO-MO, social local mobile, targeting opportunities. The fourth cause of optimism is that we will make digital newspapers profitable. Why? Because necessity is the mother of invention. For starters, in social media, content is still the king. Newspapers and TV companies have the best content in the world. We will also become better at monetising our online communities through events, games and competitions. In the US, we are already seeing the Wall Street Journal drive revenue through creating a family of products like the Wall Street Journal Professional, the CFO Journal and the CIO Journal, all targeting new niche audiences. I believe that the opportunities around search, social, mobile, geo-targeting and behavioural targeting will create fantastic new revenue streams for print. We will work out how to monetize the data that we collect. We will create niches, e.g. we will differentiate between subscribers on tablets and subscribers on smartphones and paper consumers, or any combination of the above, and charge differently. We will reward people for sharing personal data, and we will build and sell friendly and useful databases. The fifth reason for optimism is that digital papers should be more profitable and better than paper papers. There are no paper costs, van drivers, newsagents or paper boys to pay. Digital papers unquestionably deliver better quality videos, photos and diagrams. Stories can be updated through the days. We can create communities, forums, bloggers and games. We can develop a better understanding of our readers. What do they read? For how long do they read it? What do they read first? Not what they tell us they do, but what they actually do. Over time, we can target and track our readers more effectively. Will someone, one day, give away a free tablet with a digital subscription? Will this be the opportunity for the industry to do away with printing presses? The sixth and final reason is that newspapers will become better at exploiting their brands. They own some of the most famous and trusted brands in the world. The whole purpose of building a brand is to allow you to charge a premium for it. Newspapers are trusted, liked, respected, and well known. Assets that other brands would kill for. This is the gold dust that advertisers want sprinkled on their brands. In the future, this may cost them more. This fame game gives newspapers the permission to diversify onto different platforms. The more entertainment-orientated brands are well placed for social media and sharing. The quality newspaper brands are well equipped to make sense of the world around us. It must be remembered that these brands are still the go-to destination for big events, be it the disaster in Christchurch that we saw earlier, or the Olympics. In the UK, 78% of adults read national newspaper content about the Olympics. They read it in print or on digital. And just for your information, 66% of adults read it in print, and obviously there's heavy duplication here, and 51% of adults access the content via computers, mobiles or tablets. One of the new reasons that newspapers will come out of this period of forced, rapid evolution stronger is because they are such diverse products. The more diverse a species is, the better its chances of survival when the ecosystem changes. As Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. So let me conclude by looking at 5 famous brands who have all gone for very different but effective strategies. They are the Pearson Group, the Times in the UK, the Boston Globe, the New York Times and the Evening Standard. Initially, Pearson just owned the Financial Times. They built a trusted brand and then they diversified. They now own Penguin, the largest book publishing company in the world. They also own the largest education business in the world, and of course they own the FT Group. The FT, interestingly, uses a metered paywall. You're allowed 10 free articles a month, and on the 27th of July, its digital subscriber base hit 300,000, exceeding its print circulation of a mere 297,000. The Times, owned by Rupert Murdoch, who said at the World Media Summit in Beijing, whilst taking a non-too-subtle swipe at content aggregators, if we do not take advantage of the current movement towards paid content, it will be the content creators, the people in this hall in Beijing, who will pay the ultimate price, and the content kleptomaniacs who triumph. The Times has the most impenetrable paywall of any newspaper. It is simplistic. You can't share articles. However, there is a fear that the Times is less prominent in the online news dialogue. But it is based on a strongly held philosophy that it is wrong to give great content away for free. Has it worked? I don't know. It's hard to say. TimesOnline.uk used to get 750,000 free online readers per day. They now have 111,000 subscribers to the various Times digital products. The Boston Globe, our third case study, has a combination of digital paywall, and I love the terminology they've used here. They have cheap fodder, which is produced by junior writers, is free, and their noble content, produced by the more expensive journalists, is behind the paywall. I think it's brilliant the way they describe it. The fourth is the New York Times, and arguably this is the most interesting because they've released the most data about how it's gone. They built a deliberately leaky paywall in March 2011. This was after 15 years of free journalism on the web. By the 26th of July 2012, they built it to an impressive 509,000 paid-for digital subscribers. And the trend is interesting because this increased by 13% between March 2012 and July 2012. Non-subscribers, like the Financial Times, are allowed 10 free articles per month, which they are encouraged to share on social media websites. And then they have multiple subscription packages, ranging between $15 and $35 per calendar month. Year on year, they have seen us deliver an increase in circulation revenue, but this has to be offset against an 8% fall in print advertising revenue and a 4% fall in digital advertising revenue. But overall, this has led to a 1% year-on-year revenue growth, so someone is making it work. They delivered an impressive operating profit last year of £31.5 million. And I think they've also done something interesting in that they give print subscribers get free digital access. So they have a total of over 1 million people with digital access to their products. And for the first time in 5 years, last quarter, their home deliveries went up. So someone is making it work. And finally, the Evening Standard. This was a business newspaper for those that worked in the City of London. It had been really badly hurt by the launch of several free newspapers, including City AM and Metro in the morning, and the London Paper and London Light in the evening. The Evening Standard had to do something. It was hemorrhaging cash. And after 182 years, it went from being a paid-for paper to a free paper. Immediately, the two other free newspapers in London, the London Paper and London Light, closed. The Evening Standard circulation went from 280,000 to 700,000 almost immediately. The cost per thousands went down slightly, but the increase in revenues more than made up for the cover price shortfall. Impressively, since they did that, they've attracted 600 new advertisers. Why? Simply because the Evening Standard has become relevant again. And it's been interesting what they've done, because they've used the increase in revenues to invest in better and more relevant journalism. So in summary, in an increasingly cynical and manipulative world, newspapers are trusted brands. Advertisers know that and will increasingly be prepared to pay a premium to be associated with that trust. As consumers become more cynical about the independence of news and views from other channels, they will increasingly go back to papers. There will be new models. In Europe, we've seen a huge growth in free newspapers and magazines. Around the world, we are seeing different strategies regarding monetising digital content. The Times with their hard paywall, the FT and the New York Times have a metered, leaky paywall, and the Guardian and Daily Mail give us their content away for nothing, but have attracted large global audiences that they sell to advertisers. The world is getting more complex, not less. A good journalist can present both sides of the argument, reach a balanced conclusion, and make us smarter and more interesting people. As society becomes more globalised and interconnected, more decisions, taken thousands of miles away, increasingly impact on the day-to-day life in all countries around the globe. As companies get bigger and governments commission bigger projects, as more money is in sport, the role of newspapers of the fourth estate, policing these organisations, has never been more important. Penultimately, newspaper readership has never been higher. It's just in different formats. And finally, it is a period of swift and massive evolution, the biggest in newspapers' long history. But newspapers will survive. Indeed, I believe they will flourish. They're just going to be different. Thank you very much.